Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good afternoon to our listeners here at WCAT. I'm Dr. Marianne Urlakis, and I'm delighted to be joined today by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Rex. Dr. Rex is a fellow bioethicist, and you are listening to the premier program of Inter Vitam et Mortem. This show is going to be a show that we take a look at the issues of bioethics, Catholic bioethics, what they mean to humanity, what they mean to the church, what they mean to individuals. We're going to explore all sorts of issues, and we are going to look at the history of bioethics, the history of philosophy and of Catholic moral reasoning, and begin to discern right and wrong in today's ever-changing environment. Dr. Rex, before we get started, would you mind if we said a Hail Mary?
Yes, please.
All right. Let's invoke the intercession of our ever-blessed Mother. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace.
Full of grace. The Lord
is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Well, Dr. Rex, I am absolutely delighted to have you here joining me on our initial program here of Inter Vitam et Mortem. This is a program that you and I have discussed over the past year, the possibility of launching this program here. And both of us have seen a need out there to have a discussion, to invite folks to discuss issues that are near and dear to folks' hearts, to try and help educate where education is necessary, and to give other bioethicists and others who are interested a forum to share their expertise, and to help develop some tools out there for discernment and investigation. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your views on ethics?
Well, I'd be happy to, but Marianne, I am in awe of you. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, and this is your show. I am just so honored to be a part of it, but would you please, tell your audience who you are, and I'd be happy to chime in afterwards, but your background, your education, your research, your everything about you is so impressive. I'd really like to ask you if you would go first and introduce yourself, because I'm just so honored to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very kind. I am a Catholic woman who is searching and striving to lead an authentically Catholic life that is faithful to the magisterium in both my professional and my personal life. Personally, I am a mother of 8. I've been married for nearly 30 years, and my motherhood informs everything I do. I believe that as a Catholic woman, we are each called to mother in some way, whether we are celibate religious, or whether we are married, or whether we have the vocation to the generous single life. There is still a role of mother as we are patterned after Our Lady. Professionally, I am a bioethicist, a degreed bioethicist. I hold multiple graduate degrees and graduate certificates. I was the first graduate from the new then program in bioethics at the Medical College of Wisconsin about 25 years ago now. And my initial thesis was on the role of anencephalic infants in organ sourcing. Anencephaly is a rare condition. Infants are born without a portion of skull and brain. And from the beginning, I argue that every human life, from the moment of conception, is sacred, and that using infants, no matter how disabled, for their parts is absolutely wrong at every level. So my first master's thesis was on anencephaly and organ sources. I hold 2 masters, a PhD, 3 graduate certificates. I have a graduate certificate from the Seminary of St. Cyril Methodius Byzantine Catholic Seminary in Philadelphia, a graduate certificate from Catholic U in Catholic Social Teaching, and another in Catholic Medical Ethics from the Catholic Medical Association. My work involves advocating for vulnerable populations. I do work in the history of bioethics. I am passionately pro-life from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death. I work as I have recently, this year, January, coming up an anniversary now, accepted the role as the executive director of the Donum Vitae Institute, an institute that you and I initially co-founded and have recently been joined by Francis Etheridge, renowned scholar, who is also now co-founder. The Donum Vitae Institute, I'm going to let you speak more to it because this grew out of the institution that you started, Children First. The Donum Vitae Institute is dedicated to nascent human life, that life from the moment of conception until birth. Let me have you now speak about your background.
Well, wonderful. My background has taken many twists and turns, as most of the listeners, I'm sure, your lives have been led by God, and we just try to see His will and follow His will. So, I was not a Catholic. I'm from California. My parents couldn't conceive. They desperately wanted a child. They were in their early 20s, and my mother and father were eager to start a family, and it didn't happen. And I've always remembered that story. Finally, the doctor, after about 4 years, said, "Oh, go get a puppy." And they did, and boom, along came me and 4 others. So, it's so interesting how starting a family it's such an adventure, but God has His plans. So that has been part of my life. And as we moved from California to Mexico, which was quite an adventure back in the early 60s. I'm pushing 70 at this point. I don't feel it, but I was not Catholic. My sister and I were enrolled in a very large Catholic girls' school, over 1,000 students. We were the only gringas. And I have 3 brothers who are also enrolled in Catholic schools. I was the only one who became a Catholic, but it happened my senior year in high school. And I am so grateful. It has been the rock of my life. And for many years, I went on to study pre-med. I was pre-med for 2 years at the Northeastern University in Boston, very fine university. But God was calling me elsewhere, and I went to New York and finished at Barnard College, Columbia University. I decided to pursue education, I had always loved education. My father instilled that. The greatest thing he and my mother could give us was the best education possible. And so I went on from Columbia to the University of Navarre. Of course, I spoke fluent Spanish, and I pursued a master's and a doctorate in educational sciences, but the degree was actually a degree in philosophy, Thomistic ethics. My dissertation was on the end of man. The part of Thomistic philosophy that deals with ethics is what is our final end, our purpose, the meaning of our lives. And so later when I graduated, I have been in education all my life. I've taught metaphysics, I've taught religion, I've taught Spanish, I've taught science, all of those things I had studied. And then I really specialized. I was head of a girls' school in Boston, a Catholic school that was started by families that wanted a faithful Catholic education for their daughters, 7 through 12. The Montrose School, which is still there in Massachusetts. And then I came back to New York and went back to my alma mater. I was director of admissions for freshmen, and later transferred over to Columbia University, where I worked in the dean's office. I was assistant dean for academic affairs. And then I met my husband, who was, and that changes everything. So I was in my late 30s, and we were married in St. Patrick's Cathedral. He was the associate concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic, and not a Catholic. Of course, I'm a convert. And it's been a wonderful life. We've been married almost 30 years. I didn't realize we had that in common, Marianne. And I had trouble conceiving. My husband and I, it took us 4 years, and our doctors, because now I'm, 43, 44, they said, basically go get a puppy. So we bred cockatiel birds. And I mention this because it's our human soul and body. We were raising lots of little birdies, and I got pregnant at age 44 and gave birth at age 45. And we were just so grateful to God that was possible. We said, wow. And we had been looking into adoption because the doctors had said, forget about it, just think about adoption. And so we were looking at adoption, and it worked. So we decided to look into adoption again. And I know, Marianne, you've adopted children as well. And so we have adopted 2 children. We have a total of 3. But long story short, I was at home when the children came along. And then when they were all in high school, I have always loved bioethics. And I started the Children First Foundation because of our 2 adopted children. And it was named for the birth parents who put their children first.
That's beautiful.
They could have made another choice, abortion, but they didn't. They put the lives of their children first. And adoption is a very courageous, loving, difficult, but intelligent choice. And we named our organization in honor of the birth parents that made that loving choice. Adoption means love in my book. And later on, I realized that embryos could be adopted. Dr. William May, his book on Catholic bioethics. And I was fascinated by this because of our trouble about conceiving. There are so many couples who have, infertility problems. And yet 3,000 babies are being aborted every day instead of being adopted. How wonderful. So the Children First Foundation was we started it to raise money for pregnancy centers in order to help women choose life and consider adoption. In fact, that's how we adopted our daughter. There was an abortion clinic and a pregnancy center in the same building, and thank God her birth parents walked into the pregnancy center instead of the abortion clinic. They didn't speak English, and thank God for these pregnancy centers, and we connected, and they chose us, we chose them, and 8 months later we brought our beautiful daughter home.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's just, we know that adoption is a pro-life choice. There are good choices. Abortion isn't the only choice. We who are pro-life are really pro-choice. We're just not pro-abortion. So, I've spent, we started Children First in 2001. It's been 17 years. And we joined the Choose Life license plate movement when we heard about this little license plate, because license plates raises millions of dollars. The Protect the Panther plate has raised $100 million down in Florida. So the Choose Life license plate said, how come there can't be a plate to save children? By promoting adoption. And the Choose Life plate was born. It took them 4 years.
I was just going to ask you about this. This was one of you read my mind. This was one of the questions on my list. Because of you, I have a Choose Life license plate on my car here in Wisconsin. We were just approved this year.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I know that you were one of the initial brain trust that started the Choose Life license plates. Please tell me more about this.
It really is a godsend. When we read Evangelium Vitae, and that our Holy Father, St. John Paul II, says what is needed is a massive mobilization of a culture of life. I just see it as God has sent us the Choose Life license plate because we need to promote life. Choose life. In fact, they tried to block the Choose Life plate in Florida because they said, it's separation of church and state. You're putting a quote from the Old Testament on the license plate. You can't do that. Well, that was ridiculous. And they managed, it took them 4 years to get enough signatures, and the money, it's a lot of money to start a license plate. You have to show support. And it passed with bipartisan support, and then the governor vetoed it. So it made the news. It went national. It was like, and then they tried again. The first governor died in office, Governor Childs, and then Jeb Bush came into office as governor. So when they passed the bill, again, with bipartisan support to promote adoption, how can you be opposed to adoption?
Right.
And Choose Life, it's a marketing. Of course, you have to choose life first, and then you can choose adoption if that's a good choice for you. So it passed, and Governor Jeb Bush signed the bill. Well, all hell broke loose, exactly that. The state got slammed with 3 different lawsuits to try to block the plate from getting on the road. But they had 10,000 people who had said they would buy it. So they maneuvered the situation, got the plate on the road while they resolved all of the lawsuits, and they won because it's freedom of speech and it's equal protection under the law. There were other, license plates protecting the manatee and saving the panther, and why couldn't there be, a license plate to promote adoption? It just makes too much sense.
Right.
It's pro-choice. It's pro-life. It's a wonderful way to promote a good cause. And there's so many people who want to adopt children. And there are no children to adopt because they're all being aborted.
Right.
And women don't know that there's a good choice, and they can give the gift of life, donum vitae, to the child and to an adoptive family. It's such a beautiful choice. It's doubly loved. That child is a child of God. We're all adopted children of God. So this is the beauty of this license plate. And now I think Wisconsin is either the 32nd or the 33rd state in the nation that have passed their own Choose Life license plate. And altogether, since the year 2000, $28 million have been raised for pregnancy centers in each of those states, and it's still in its infancy.
$28 million since 2001?
I think it was 2000 when it got on the road, August 11th.
For pregnancy help centers. That is phenomenal. I'm associated with a couple of pregnancy help centers here, and Pro-Life Wisconsin as well. And in the year that this has been here in Wisconsin, I know just how phenomenal it has been. And you are so right. Adoption is a wonderful choice. And I have 3 adopted children, as you mentioned. I have 2 children who were adopted from Guatemala and 1 beautiful little girl from Ethiopia. I have 5 children who were conceived the old-fashioned way, 4 of them C-sections on delivery. And after the birth of child number 4, we were having a hard time conceiving. We wanted more children. It was 2.5 years, and God hadn't chosen to give us another child. My father was adopted. His father was adopted. I had always wanted to adopt, knowing we have a strong family history of adoption, and believing strongly in adoption. And as you said, we are all adopted sons and daughters of God. We are all part of the family of God. And adoption is just another means of making those family relationships solid.
That's right.
So we had hoped to initially adopt twins, and began to look at different programs. At that point, trying to find twins locally was not going to happen. So we put in for Guatemala before the program for adoption was closed in Guatemala. And the week that we found out that we were not going to be able to adopt twins were just not going to happen, I found out I was pregnant with Joey. And
that happened to me. It's so beautiful.
George and Joey arrived at about the same time. Joey by C-section, George by airline from Guatemala. And after that, the beautiful young lady from Guatemala followed a year or 2 later, and then the one from Ethiopia followed 1 year after that. You and I have talked extensively about how our motherhood and our motherhood of adopted children and biological children also informs, God has been so good to us both by allowing us to experience the joys, the disappointments, the sorrows of all of this, and that it really makes a difference in our ethical practice and our ethical praxis in the way we reason through dilemmas. So often as pro-lifers, we're on the front lines at abortion clinics, praying outside of abortion clinics. We've got angry people looking at us saying, I bet you would not adopt any of these children. Well, yes, actually we have. We've done this several times.
That's right.
And we would. And it gives us a sense of credibility. We also have a different way of looking at things in terms of compassion, of compassion. We love the birth moms and agonize over the choices that they had to make. And celebrate them in our hearts. I know I pray for those families each and every day, and thank God that those mothers had the courage and the grace to say yes to what God was asking them. Can you speak to this too?
Oh, absolutely. I met both birth mothers and birth fathers. So the birth parents of our son, and then the birth parents of our daughter when my husband and I were both 50. It's such a gift. They chose us, we chose them, and we just know that God, from all eternity, knew that this was His plan for us and for our children and for the birth parents. And what matters is that we're all children of God, as you've said, Marianne. So it's an insight that I hope you and I can share as we launch this wonderful program, and we'll continue the conversation, invite others to join us, that we need to mobilize a culture of life, and that our choices must be life choices. That's, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I love that. And I from the license plate efforts, and my husband and I wanted to bring the Choose Life license plate to New York. We were living in New York, and we got rejected. And it wasn't.
I can only imagine. Elizabeth, Dr. Rex, the things you amaze me. There has been no mountain that is too large for you to tackle, and for you to say we are going to bring the culture of life. We're going to drive it into New York. Yeah, on our car. We're going to drive the culture of life in, and we're starting small. We're starting with the license plate.
We're going to take it to the streets. We're going to mobilize the culture of life, and they tried to stop us, and so we finally had to sue the state of New York because there were 300 license plates, everything under the sun. Knights of Columbus, Catholic men's organization that follow the Pope and love Mary and the Eucharist, they have a license plate in New York because they make money for the state. As well as for organizations. They have organizational plates, and it was called Take Your Pride for a Ride. And so they had all these. The Masons had 2 license plates. They're a secret society. Unions had 3 license plates. Everyone, the ski clubs had license plates. Anybody could get a license plate. And so along came Little Children First Foundation. We wanted a pro-adoption plate, and they said, oh, no. The graphic was 2 smiling children. It's like a little drawing made by children, and the words Choose Life. And they said, oh, that's patently offensive. We're rejecting you. Well, that's just patently ridiculous. And so we said, no, it's not. This is, you need to, we meet the criteria. There's something called freedom of speech and equal treatment under the law and due process, and they refused. And we did that then we went into Connecticut. We got the plate approved in Connecticut. And the domain name is Fund Adoption. And they approved it. The Constitution State approved our Choose Life plate that said Fund Adoption on it and Choose Life. So then we went back to New York, and they still wouldn't approve us. So then we went into New Jersey, and we almost got approved, and then they blocked us in New Jersey. And then it was just no way. It was the same thing. It was an organizational plate. They had plates for many other organizations. We met the criteria. We worked hard to meet the criteria. We had to get 500 people and $12,500, and we did. It took us a while, and then they blocked us. So then we had to sue in New Jersey, and because you have to stand up. This is government censorship. This is government discrimination. That is against the Constitution. This country is so important. We're a beacon of freedom, and we have to defend our rights or we'll lose them. So the Alliance Defending Freedom, wonderful organizations, and there are others. They took our case as they were involved in other Choose Life lawsuits because everywhere it's gone, it's met opposition, but people have fought for it and won because we have these freedoms, and if we don't use them, we're going to lose them.
Exactly.
So it mobilizes people. They fight for a good cause, and when you win, they get the plate, and it drives the opposition crazy, and it's a short trip. So you're like enemy number 1 trying to keep these license plates off the road. Because hundreds of people will see your license plate, Marianne, when you're evangelizing every time you drive. And it may be a sign that will save a baby's life, that someone who is praying for a sign will see your Choose Life message and it has little baby feet on it, doesn't it?
Right.
And will say, that's the answer to my prayers. That's the sign I was looking for. And I am going to choose life. And you'll never know, but God knows. So it's such a wonderful, it's something so simple that everyone can do. And it promotes adoption.
It promotes adoption. It keeps those pregnancy help centers
alive. All this money
one of the pregnancy help centers that I'm associated with here is Life Connections. And similar story to the story that you shared about the adoption for one of your children. We are like 500 feet away from the entrance to Planned Parenthood. And one of these God moments, the GPS coordinates for Planned Parenthood somehow ring up at the front door of Life Connections. So Life Connections has had many folks walk through the door thinking that they were going to one place and ending up, by God, at another and choosing life. And it is these plates that help to bring the funding to keep these institutions alive, and they do such good work. The Women's Support Center is another one that I'm associated with. And not only are these and I'm over the course of the many months now, I hope to have both Chris Crawley, who is the director of Life Connections, and Mary Claire Stevens, who is the director of the Women's Support Center, as guests on this program. So for those who are listening, in future weeks, they're going to be on here as well. But these centers, they provide thanks to the Knights of Columbus, the ultrasound to show women the child that they are carrying. And we've got statistical evidence that show that 90% of the women who see that child on ultrasound recognize that it's a child and will keep that child. So providing those ultrasounds early is important. It is merely showing the truth. God shows us himself through the transcendentals of goodness, truth, and beauty. And when that woman and her and the father of that child look at that screen, they immediately see the goodness, truth, and beauty of what is hidden inside of her womb. So the pregnancy health centers are providing the ultrasound. They are providing the prenatal care that these women need, and afterward they are providing the classes, the diapers, the clothes, the formula. We don't abandon these women. These women have a connection there. They're given the social support they need. They're given the spiritual support they need. They're also given the tangible support that they need to take care of these children, our children.
That's right. And
were you successful in both New Jersey and New York after the lawsuits?
Well, the elections matter. Governor Christie, when he was running for governor, because it had been controlled by the other party for many decades, promised that, because we had like a 7-year lawsuit at that point, that he would approve the Choose Life license plate in New Jersey, and he would defund Planned Parenthood. And he won. And he was reelected, and he made good on his promise. His very first term, he settled the lawsuit, and the Choose Life plate got on the road in New Jersey. Amazing, amazing pro-life victory. The pro-life initiative has really rallied people in every state, like Wisconsin, and united them to think, you know what? This is, we can promote life, we can promote free speech, we can support the pregnancy centers. It's just such a wonderful way to unite with each other and see each other. It's good for us when we see someone with a Choose Life plate. It's a morale builder for all of us to know there are others. We don't know who they are, but we're united, and we're mobilizing this culture of life. And so, bottom line, New York did not ever, and so we had to sue the state of New York. And, Marianne, it was in 2004, they shut down the entire custom plate program in New York State to block the Children First Foundation and the Choose Life license plate. It was unbelievable. And it was Governor Pataki. You know, this goes to both parties, Republican and Democrat, are very influenced by the money and the politics of Planned Parenthood and the abortion agenda. So with the help of the Alliance Defending Freedom, we took our case. We won. We actually won the case in New York State, but Governor Andrew Cuomo appealed it. So it got appealed, and then the Supreme Court, there were many other lawsuits, as I mentioned, and actually another organization, the Sons of the Confederate Veterans license plate in Texas, was rejected, and it was an organizational plate like ours. But they kept us on hold for 3 years. Talk about the corruption of the courts and the corruption of our government over the issue of life and death, of abortion. It's dividing our nation as it divided our nation over the issue of slavery. And what is right, what is wrong can never be a right. And so we were kept waiting for 3 years for our decision at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, while the Confederate flag plate was put on fast track. And so they ended up taking the Confederate flag plate when our cute little children, a little boy and a little girl, in the words Choose Life, were kept on hold. I couldn't imagine why we didn't get our decision.
Unbelievable.
We got a preview. This is our second trip to the second Court of Appeals, and we got our decision in 4 months. Now we're waiting almost 3 years. I couldn't understand what was going on. Why did we get our decision? And we won it the first time we went to the appellate court. So no, then the Supreme Court takes the Confederate flag plate. But it was exactly the same issues as ours in New York. And this was in 2012, so this is an 11-year federal lawsuit that my husband and I fought. We were the defendants. No, we were the plaintiffs. We sued, and we lost. It was a clear cut. It was a 5-4 decision, a split decision, and unfortunately, the 4 pro-abortion Supreme Court justices, let's just say it, and Clarence Thomas, who voted against the Confederate flag plate, instead of supporting freedom of speech, they supported state speech. And they won. It was a devastating decision for freedom of speech. It was a wrong decision.
Yes.
Freedom of speech is what is guaranteed, even controversial speech.
Right.
So it's, but a blessing in disguise, Marianne, as always. You look, you accept God's will, and now we have. We're not not one to be deterred.
You are one tenacious, formidable lady. 11 years on this lawsuit. I am so glad you're on this program today talking about this. I talk to many pro-lifers and heads of organizations, and I don't think they know what you have done for the Choose Life license plate. I am so glad to get this story out there.
Well, we got the plate approved in Washington, D.C. Little children first. It went right through. During the Obama administration, they obeyed the laws. They treated us like anyone else. And so we have the license plate in Connecticut, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., but we got rejected. Now, if we ever get a pro-life governor in New York, we'll get our Choose Life license plate.
I would imagine you will go right back. Knowing you...
But in the meantime, we have a hashtag, and we don't need permission. It's a little license plate that can be bolted to your car and sticks up either above or below your regular license plate. And Choose Life is even bigger, and the children are bigger. Everything is bigger and better, so no one can stop us, and the state won't get a dime. So I'm thrilled. We're going to be launching this. We've launched it last year. We're going to do more this year. But bottom line, I want to say that all of this then led me. I'm an educator, and I was fortunate with my PhD in Thomistic ethics to get a job teaching Catholic bioethics at Holy Apostles College and Seminary.
It's a phenomenal school.
And it's one of the Cardinal Newman Society colleges that are faithful to the magisterium and academically rigorous. And by providence, they were looking for a bioethics professor, and it was my first teaching position. I loved it. I taught Catholic bioethics for 5 years to graduate students and seminarians, and I just love it. And so when you teach, you learn, and it's always evolving from year to year. But bioethics is such an important field. And I am especially, right now there's a big debate within the Catholic Church. Of course, IVF is artificial conception, and like artificial contraception is unnatural and immoral. And that is my passion now. I have written many, many articles using Donum Vitae and Dignitas Personae. I've written in the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly, which is published by the National Catholic Bioethics Center, NCBC, which is a wonderful organization from beginning of life to end of life, womb to tomb issues. But the beginning of life issues are very complex, as you know.
They are.
And so it has to be like a specialty, and you have to go in depth and see what these documents, this magisterial documents, actually are saying. And while they condemn all of the artificial, unnatural, immoral IVF, in vitro fertilization, surrogacy, cloning, all of these violations of the child, just like rape and incest and adultery, are sins that many times cause the conception of a child, which many times is then likely to be aborted because it was an unintended, unwanted pregnancy. So too, IVF has serious side effects as the leftover frozen embryos,
right,
or the ones that are discarded because they're deemed genetically defective, or and then just given to scientific researchers where they're experimented upon. People don't realize how many human lives are created and destroyed with these artificial reproductive techniques. But it does not say that a child, an IVF embryo, should be killed. To the contrary, it says a child, no matter how it is conceived, whether by IVF or in another immoral fashion, must be brought up in love. Donum Vitae clearly states that an IVF embryo is a gift from God and must be brought up in love. So that opens the question, well, of course, the biological parents should bring that baby home. That's their son or daughter that is in the petri dish or frozen in liquid nitrogen. Those are their children. Life does begin at conception, as it did for Mary, the Immaculate Conception, and for Jesus, of course, at the moment of the Incarnation. There's no question that life begins at conception. So if the biological parents don't want their frozen embryos, then don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That child can be adopted just like any other child that's either an unplanned pregnancy or an unwanted newborn. Sometimes children are also killed at birth. Neonaticide and infanticide is a huge problem because many times pregnancy are hidden, and when the baby is born, they've hidden their pregnancy under bulky clothes in the winter, whatever. They give birth in a bathroom, and they leave the baby in the dumpster, right, or drowned in the toilet. I mean, these are just horrendous. They feel like they have no choice, and they don't realize that all 50 states have passed safe haven laws where you can bring an unplanned, baby, unwanted baby to an emergency hospital room. No questions asked. Bring the baby safe and sound, and then walk away. You will not be prosecuted for abandonment or child endangerment. Women have legally the option to bring a child to a hospital or a fire station and just say, here's my baby, not give any information. It's called safe havens, and walk away. And that baby will be instantly adopted. So again, adoption to the rescue. Adoption for embryos, I believe, is the moral option for a difficult situation. People don't know what to do with their frozen embryos. And there are so many people who have adopted these little snowflake babies. Over 500 babies have been adopted as frozen embryos, transferred to the adoptive mother's womb and the adopted father, the families usually, and brought to term. And they're their birth children. They actually give birth to their own adopted children. And it's just, we're hoping that, our work, Marianne, you and I've written an article called The Magisterial Lyceity of Embryo Transfer, which is a procedure. Embryo transfer must be considered licit. Any medical procedures on an embryo must be considered licit. That's what the magisterium teaches. It's like any other child or any other human person at any age or any stage. Medicine to save its life, procedures to save the life or heal the life of embryos must be considered licit. So we're hoping that our educational efforts through the Donum Vitae Institute and many others who also agree with this, that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So all of these...
One of the issues that you and I feel very strongly about, and one of the issues that is paramount on the radar of the Donum Vitae Institute is an Embryo Protection Act. You and I
Correct.
were both recent speakers at a conference on the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae that was offered for bishops and their staff in Milwaukee. The conference was designed by Archbishop Jerome Listecki, and we were terribly grateful to His Excellency to have been invited to speak. Vicki Thorne, the director of Project Rachel, the largest, most successful post-abortion ministry in the world, was the one who organized the conference that His Excellency had asked for the anniversary of Humanae Vitae, and we were joined by Dr. Angela Lafraki and Dr. Waters and Vicki Thorne as presenters at this very special conference. One of the things that you and I both spoke about in terms of the numbers of frozen embryos and just the horrific nature of the procedure of IVF and the creation of frozen embryos specifically only for research. There is a caveat in the law that allows children to be created in a laboratory as long as they're killed by day 14 before a primitive streak develops. Absolutely horrific. The numbers of children that are being created and frozen, created and experimented upon, created and discarded, these numbers rival the deaths of all world wars combined. And we passionately believe there needs to be an Embryo Protection Act. I know you're well versed in this. Could you speak to the need for an Embryo Protection Act?
This is not well known. And in 1990, Germany had learned its lessons during the Nuremberg trials, where doctors were executed for the experiments, the atrocious experimentation upon Jews, Catholics, others at the hands of Nazi doctors. The world just reacted and said never again. And not only were they executed for these atrocities, the Nuremberg Code was developed to prevent that from ever happening again in the world. So along comes the embryonic stem cell research in the wake of all of these leftover frozen embryos, and Germany wanted nothing to do with it. They had learned their lesson. So they were the first country in the world to pass an embryo protection law. And it's not very long. You can Google it. You can look it up, 1990. And they specify that if an embryo is harmed or killed, there will be fines, imprisonment, or both. You cannot harm an embryo in Germany to this day. So it is model legislation. And then Italy, in the year I believe it was 2004, also passed similar legislation in that they passed the law of medically assisted reproduction, with the moral medically assisted reproduction law, and it prohibits cryopreservation, and it prohibits fertilizing more than 3 eggs, and you cannot discard any, and you have to transfer all 3 of them. It can only be a married couple. You can only do it once. So these laws in Germany and Italy made the front pages of the National Catholic Register, where I eagerly gobbled them up and assimilated them as I was looking into embryo adoption. And these laws, I was so impressed. I took them myself to when President George Bush vetoed. It was his first veto. The embryonic research bills that had been passed in the House and the Senate. The first time, it was his first veto, and he surrounded himself when he was vetoing, which had been passed. It had been passed in the House with enough, but he had enough votes to veto it and to survive. So, and it happened also in the Senate. He vetoed that one as well. So God bless him, and today his father has passed away. I'd like to ask
May he rest in peace, and may his memory be eternal.
To pray for President Bush Sr. But in any event, George Bush W. Protected embryos in this country and surrounded himself with snowflake babies. These were the frozen snowflake embryos that had been adopted, and their families. Snowflake families is what they're called, snowflake babies. And he said, this is why I'm vetoing this bill, because embryos are children. It was beautiful. So I wrote a letter, and I wanted to thank every single senator who had voted with the president, and I wanted to give them the German law, the Embryo Protection Act, as well as the Italian law to regulate the in vitro fertility industry, which is now $1 billion industry. It's all about money.
Right.
And I handed it in person to Senator Sam Brownback, who was the leader, the majority leader at that time, and he was very interested. And I went to every office of every senator that I possibly could. I went to Washington, and that was in 2007. So these laws are model legislation to this day. And now we've had the recent news just this week that some of these
out of China,
out of China, if you want to tell them, they are, go ahead, because you are very aware of what's happening.
That's okay. You keep going. There is a researcher in China who has announced that he had used the technology CRISPR. It's a very complicated technology. It is the equivalent of genetic surgery. It allows the manipulation of the human genome at a minute level. It holds great promise, but like Pandora's box, it also holds great demise if it is used unwittingly. And international outrage resulted from the announcement by this researcher that he had been genetically manipulating the frozen embryos of 7 couples in China in an attempt to develop a child that would be immune to HIV. And that he had the first successful, if one calls it a success, the first successful proof of his work was the birth of twin girls this week. Now, these are are claims that this researcher is making. He has published nothing in a credible journal yet, so no one is able to go and check his technique or check what he's done. But taken on the face of it, prima facie, the claim he's making is just horrendous. He has taken life and manipulated life, and all for experimental purposes, all for scientific hubris. He is the first to be able to lay claim to using this technique to alter the genome of children who have been successfully born. At an ethical level, this is abhorrent. At a scientific level, this is also terribly dangerous. We don't know what the results of this will be. By manipulating a genome, we have no idea what other genes will be affected. We have no idea what will be passed on through these children. Genes are like dominoes. You know, you knock one over, and you're knocking others over as well. So
what we're looking at is the destruction of the human race.
We are.
And CRISPR has actually been labeled as a weapon of mass destruction by the Department of Defense, because it can be used for evil, to destroy as a weapon in war. There are biological weapons, and there just has to be a line in the sand, and that you do not. And it is at the first moment of conception. Human life must be sacred, right. And we must not allow that to happen. So the world is outraged it's very complicated. They're outraged that they let these little girls live.
That they passed the 14-day mark, that they passed the primitive streak.
The 14-day rule, that he should have killed them.
Right,
but
right.
He didn't. And now they're alive, but the consequences, should they be, should they be sterilized so they don't reproduce? We don't know.
Right.
These are very, very dangerous scientific experiments. This is what the Nazis were doing. It was eugenic.
Exactly. There is no difference between what this individual did in the research laboratory and what the Nazi doctors were doing.
Exactly. And they were condemned, as rightly they should have been. Right. God is the author of life. It is a gift from God, even if it's defective. We have our spiritual souls, our bodies. God and our parents have co-created each one of us. We are children of God, and the tree of life is being attacked.
Right.
And we know what happened with the tree of good and evil. Adam and Eve, they said, nope, I'm going to be the one. I'm going to be like God. I'm going to decide what's right and wrong. And here we are today. It's no different. And we must, as Christians and as human beings, defend human life. It's such a moral imperative. And it's at the smallest of all, the least of our brethren. What we do to them, we do to Jesus as Christians, and we do to God. God was an embryo. God himself. It's so amazing. You and I have discussed this. The incarnation, what did Jesus look like? Perfect God, perfect man. He chose
looked like
a human zygote.
Exactly. Dr. Rex, as I look at our time, we have hit an hour. And
well, thank you so much.
And I look forward to having you on this show again. This hour has gone very quickly for me, and there are so many issues here to unpack. And I hope our listeners will turn in again week after week. And I look forward to the next time that you're able to sit down and have an hour to have a conversation with me. There is so much here to unpack. But let's thank God for the gift of life and the time that we've had here together, and thank our listeners for taking the time to tune in as well.
Thank you, Marianne. God bless.
God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.